Hey guys, welcome to episode 32. I am Jennie O'Connor, and I help multi-passionate creatives slay imposter syndrome so they can embrace being visible, grow their audience, and finally do the thing that scares them. Like embracing the fact that you know enough to get started today, not tomorrow, today. You don't need more experience. While you're getting more experience, someone else is out there doing the thing. All you need is to be 2 steps ahead of the people that you're helping. So just take messy action. These are the kinds of things that we talk about on this show. If you are already subscribed, thank you so much. You are so awesome. I love you. And if you were just tuning in for the first time, do be sure to hit subscribe because next week I'm chatting with this super awesome lady, you guys, who is the prime example of nonlinear, outside of the box thinking and making connections that our other linear-minded brethren might not make. She is an inspiration in the realm of courage and creative risk, so you definitely don't want to miss it. Today I'm going to start with a story. I've been doing that lately, and it's a little bit crazy. So when I was in first grade, we were learning to write our letters. That's, 6 is when that happens, and they gave us, I don't know if you guys remember it was almost like a grid. It was lined paper and then there was like a line bisecting the top and bottom line so that you could just like make sure that your proportions were correct as you were, learning how to write letters. And I used a straight edge ruler to make the straight lines for all of my letters. So instead of just freehanding it, I needed a device to make them perfect. And I somehow intuitively knew, I think probably because none of the other students in the class were doing it, I somehow intuitively knew I shouldn't be. So I was writing my letters underneath my desk with my ruler. And I remember getting reprimanded for it, which is so funny, as if like I needed to be scolded, as if I wasn't already making myself completely miserable by trying to make my stupid letters perfect. But so that's just a little bit of insight into my personality. I also have these recollections of coloring with my mom. Coloring being presumably a fun activity, right? As a kid, you like to color maybe? Yeah, no, not for me. I was looking over my mom's shoulder the whole time because to my mind, her coloring was absolutely perfect and mine needed to be as well. So I remember she would take her crayon and she would outline the black lines of whatever the picture was with really darkly with that color. And then she'd shade the inside faintly with that same color. And it just looked amazing to me. And so I was constantly trying to make my coloring, my art at the age of 4, exactly the same as hers or better, because then I would be even more perfect, essentially. So this modality of living in a world where I felt it necessary to only be perfect or otherwise hide had some disastrous results. So by college, I had figured out that I wanted to do theatrical costume design, and I think it was the first show I ever designed on opening night landed me in the hospital on a morphine drip, y'all. That's like some serious stuff. And it was stress-induced, naturally, but it came from the fact that when you have a 30-person cast that you're costume designing for and you get hung up on tiny details, like altering every single hemline, way bigger balls are going to get dropped. Like, I don't know, self-care, managing your stress levels. And you're going to end up having a total physical meltdown or breakdown. Neither one is a good thing. And I was sitting in my hospital bed, totally out of it on a morphine drip, but on the phone with the people in the show trying to give them instructions because I couldn't be there to do the thing. So the point of all of this is that if you're a perfectionist or you know someone who is, you probably already know that this isn't a fun way to live. Maybe you've heard the quote, comparison is the thief of joy. And I think that comparison and perfectionism are inextricably linked together. Because I think you either A, compare yourself to others and you decide that they're perfect, their version of perfect is unattainable to you. You can't measure up to their perfect. So then you think to yourself, why bother? Like, I just won't do anything. I'll just sit down and watch Netflix and eat a bag of Cheetos because I'll never measure up. So there's that. Or B, you're only competing against yourself, but the perfect end result that you saw in your mind is not the end result that you're now holding in your hands like this. In which case, you decide, well, this sucks. I'm never going to show it to anyone. This is embarrassing. Ugh. And then you throw the project out or you walk away from it and you never go back to it. In either case, you are not having fun. Am I right? You are either limiting your potential or you're a shadow artist. You are just like hiding in the shadows because you don't feel like your work is worthy of being seen by people. So here's another example. I've always admired artists who dive unself-consciously into new art mediums. Like, these folks have no issue with being beginner. They're just excited by the idea of something new and unexplored that they want to try. Now, I know as multi-potentialites, we all have that in us a little bit. So imagine for me as a child, like these two things in conflict with one another. I wanted to learn new things, but I didn't want to be a beginner. I didn't want to be bad at anything. I was literally afraid of artistic mediums I hadn't ever tried before. I only wanted to use the stuff that I knew I was good at. But here's the thing. Those fearless artists, they're much better artists. They allow themselves to play and to follow their curiosity. And both of those things are necessary to stretch and to innovate and to create unself-consciously from the soul. And at the end of the day, that's the way you want your creating to come about, to have it be from the soul unself-consciously, because if you have a voice in your ear constantly telling you you're not good enough, your art is going to reflect a little bit of that holding back that you're doing. So let's talk about where perfectionism comes from. So kids are naturally curious, right? Like, if you have children, they probably drive you crazy. Why do whales have blubber? Why is the sky blue? Is that squirrel a girl or a boy? Are we there yet? Like, occasionally curiosity is met with frustration because you're just like, oh my God, child, stop asking. Like, as parents, I think we might all have been guilty of this at least once. And what happens is, by the time we're literally, there's a statistic that says this, and I talked about it, I think, in the curiosity episode. By the time we're 6, there's a statistic that says that kids only ask one question per class per month. By the time they're 6. So they go from that 3-year-old that's like, why, to only feeling like they can be curious once a month per class, which is kind of crazy. The reason for this is because curiosity and inquisitiveness are not rewarded. The teacher gets frustrated. You're interrupting the lecture to ask questions that may or may not be related. So those behaviors aren't rewarded, and that is why we train it out of our kids. So by 6, they've already learned that that's not something that is considered valuable. But you know what is? Getting the answer right. So positive reinforcement at a very young age sets it up where we perceive that we are more valuable when we are right, when we get the answer right all the time, ideally. So in other words, when we're perfect. So positive reinforcement tells us that perfect equals valuable. So I read this book called The Confidence Code, and I'll drop the link to that in the show notes. And it was really, really good. If you are in any way interested in confidence or psychology and how the different genders approach confidence and display it and manifest it in their lives, because it's so drastically different between men and women. And that is like a gender thing and a biology thing way more than it is. It's more of a nurture thing than a nature thing. Let's put it that way. So this book suggests that whereas little boys are almost expected to be loud and mischievous and get into stuff and be dirty and take up space, little girls, on the other hand, are told to be quiet and polite and to not interrupt and to not make waves or be loud and to ingratiate themselves. Be likable, be nice, be polite, right? So little girls especially, if we want to please our parents and our teachers, we learn fast that falling in line and being a perfect little lady is how we make that happen. So right there, you can see where this belief, this like, I must be perfect, comes from, right? So there's just no way. There's no way we're going to grow up as from girls into women without equating perfection with being valuable, with being worthy. And we reach a point where there's no differentiation between being perfect and creating perfect work. So those are two very different things. Being one way and producing something and then assuming that that is an extension of our being. So our work becomes an extension of our self-worth. So if our product that we create, our art, our book that we write, whatever that thing is for you, isn't perfect, we believe that we are a failure. So rather than seeing the work maybe as a failure, and just because it's not perfect doesn't mean it's a failure, and we'll get to that, but now we are a failure. Those are two different things. So this idea that perfect equals valuable is so pervasive because we actually, as a society, we glamorize it, which is gross. Think about this. It is the go-to answer to that old interview question, what is your worst character flaw? People all the time say, oh, well, I'm just a perfectionist. Like, people believe that telling a potential employer that it's not really a flaw. It makes you sound diligent. It makes you sound hardworking. Surely everyone wants a perfectionist on their team, right? So before researching this episode, just based on live experience, I would have said that perfectionism is bad in all instances. Because I've worked so hard to stop being this way because it was preventing me from doing anything, from getting literally anything done. But it turns out my research resulted in a very interesting discovery. There are actually two different kinds of perfectionism: adaptive and maladaptive. So adaptive perfectionism is characterized as actually it's normal and it's healthy. And it basically means that you derive satisfaction from accomplishing something that was hard, that took some effort, while simultaneously tolerating the imperfections that are just inherent in being human and creating a thing without beating yourself to bits about it. So with adaptive perfectionism, you can call yourself a perfectionist if you strive for excellence, but give yourself grace to be human and therefore fallible. It makes sense then that adaptive perfectionists have high self-esteem, life satisfaction. They're good at regulating their emotions. They're good at taking exams, and they achieve in academics. They have good study behaviors. They're motivated at school. They have an easier time making decisions about careers. This may or may not apply to multi-potentialites. But you can see how these things all sort of fall in line with like a healthy self-esteem, sense of self-worth. Also noteworthy about adaptive perfectionists is they believe themselves to be supported. There's a support network there, whether it's their parents or their good friends or their significant other. Someone is there like in the background cheering them on. On the other hand, maladaptive perfectionists, so the bad kind, that's defined by having high performance standards and a tendency to be extremely hard on yourself. So that's what we're talking about in this episode here. And that is what the exercises that I'm about to give you are meant to help you conquer. So I feel like this episode is going to resonate with a lot of people. I know a lot of people who are perfectionists or have perfectionistic tendencies that they have to sort of like constantly do battle with. So these types of perfectionists feel the need to control their environment. And often when events don't go as planned, they can develop a really bad attitude about that. I used to be a wedding planner. I know I've mentioned that in other episodes. And brides, one of the reasons I don't do it anymore is that brides would get so hung up on their day being perfect that they lost sight of what was important, and they'd like start having these meltdowns and like screaming at their, I just remember opening the dressing room door one day and the bride's like infant, like toddler, could barely walk. So little bitty in a little tux. I don't know if he was a nephew or what. He wasn't her kid, but he like toddles in the room and his hands are out like this. And he's coming towards her pristine white dress, and she just lost her ever-loving mind. Get him out of here! Blah! It was so terrible because she, like, I don't know if his hands were dirty or she was afraid his hands were dirty, but like, weddings are about love. And somehow people absolutely forget that. They think that they are about like the ribbon colors matching the napkins. So these are the kind of meltdowns that can happen if you're a perfectionist and you have to control your environment and your environment doesn't oblige, which is often going to be the case. Also, if you're a parent and you have a daughter, especially, if she's ever had a meltdown about an art project, like I feel like this is another thing that if you have a little girl or did at some point have she was tiny, you remember these meltdowns, because definitely it doesn't look the way I want it to look. Whether they rip it up or they dump all the glitter on the floor or whatever. Like, these are very real experiences that we have because of this sad tendency towards wanting to be better, like not better, like the pinnacle of perfect all the time. So adaptive perfectionism arises from being really, really driven, really motivated, really ambitious. Maladaptive perfectionism arises from shame. We struggle to be perfect in areas where we feel the most vulnerable to shame. Because if we can be perfect in that area, we can protect ourselves from criticism, blame, and ridicule. We think that it will keep us from being hurt, but all it does is keep us from being seen. So think about that. We're trying to protect ourselves from being hurt, and as a result, we're just invisible. So the inimitable Brené Brown says, when perfectionism is driving, shame is always riding shotgun, and fear is the annoying backseat driver. Best case scenario, it's an attempt to cover self-doubt and avoid taking creative risks. That's like, even if it's not like terrible shame and awful fear. Even in the best case, you have self-doubt and you're risk averse. So I especially want to address this last part about not taking creative risks. So starting a business while struggling with perfectionism makes the journey 1,000 times harder, because when you create something, it never feels good enough. And instead of thinking, will it work? All you're thinking of is, what if I fail? It's so hard to make money with this mindset. And I have 2 failed businesses to prove it. I went through I checked all of the boxes of getting the business ready to go, and then had so much negative self-talk about whether or not I was expert enough, whether or not this was a product that was ready to be presented to the world, that I just hid. And as a business owner, you can't hide. That's not a good way to do business, interestingly enough. So I would invite you instead to think about all of this in a different way. Every day that you push a project back to just get it right, to just tweak it a little bit more, make it a little bit more perfect, is another day that you don't get to help somebody. It's also another day further away from generating income. But if you start approaching your business and what you have to offer to the world as a way to help, it's almost doing the world a disservice to hide it and continue to tweak it and perfect it, because there are people that need it. So you have to put it out there. So I've got some exercises for you that will hopefully help you challenge your perfectionistic behaviors. So this first one, you'll need to set aside a little time. So if you're driving, you can do this later. And I included all of this in a downloadable freebie that you can get. I'll link to that in the end. But you're going to want to write down everything that you do on a daily or weekly basis that you feel needs to be perfect. Like the stuff that you really feel pushed to spend time on tweaking it until it's exactly right. if it's hard for you to just, like for me, that was hard to just come up with those off the top of my head. So you can use the following categories to help you get started. And we keep kind of repeating these categories in different episodes. So they're listed in the freebie, so you don't have to remember them or write them down right now. But they sort of help you target the different areas of your life and see if there's any aspect of that area that you really feel the need to be perfect in all the time. So consider health, your career, learning and continuing education, your money situation, your family, your romantic life, your hobbies and how often you explore your curiosity, and then your spirituality. So once you've come up with some things that you do, behaviors that you engage in on the regular, that you are sort of constantly kicking yourself, like this isn't good enough, this isn't good enough. Next to each behavior, write down why. Why does this need to be perfect? So for example, maybe you resist delegating tasks to a coworker because you don't trust that person to do it right. So that's a very valid reason. So at work, I have to do this and this and this perfectly. And if I gave it to anyone else, it wouldn't get done right. And then I would get backlash from my superior. So that's all really valid. So you're going to want to write down the why. Maybe you're dating someone new and there are certain behaviors you engage in that relationship that you feel like need to be perfect. Like maybe you feel like you need to look perfect, and that's because you feel that this person will not value you if you don't look perfect when you show up, which is really hard to do, guys, because no one wakes up looking perfect, right? So go through, write down why you feel this activity must be just so. And then next, pick one off of your list. Do not try to do this with everything at once. That's overwhelming and you will just ultimately accomplish nothing. But pick the behavior that you'd most like to change. The one that would just give you this like huge sigh of relief if you could do away with it for good. And then you're going to work with it for a little while, and then you can move on to the next one. So eventually you can tackle everything on this list. Just don't try to do it all at once. And the thing you want to do once you've found that particular behavior is you want to create a strategy to challenge that behavior. So an example from my own life. I'm a writer, so I tend to be very snooty about writing. Like I'm always editing people in my head. And I know this, and this is one of those areas where like my perfectionism just probably won't ever go away, but it extends to myself, obviously. And so when I'm sending an email, just a dumb work email to someone, I will check and recheck it a dozen times. I will spend 10 minutes on a 4-sentence email just because I'm terrified of the notion of sending something out that has grammatical errors. Let me just tell you, autocorrect is my personal worst nightmare because I sometimes I'm driving and I can't type with my fingers. And so I'm just talking into the phone and sending it off. And then later when I check it, it's like full of grammatical errors and misspellings. And I'm just mortified. So this is my stupid little cross to bear. My strategy to challenge that behavior, instead of checking and rechecking every single email a dozen times, is I now vowed to myself to check it only twice. Once right when I finished writing it, and then I'm allowed to like walk away and come back 10 minutes later or an hour later and read it one more time before I shoot it off. And that's it. And it's like a huge time-saving device because 12 times versus 2 times, I mean, think about it. It's crazy making, right? So that's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 is to ship the MVP. Have you guys heard of minimum viable product? Really big in the tech world. In Apple, Microsoft, the people that create technology who need to see if something works, they are the ones that invented the term fail fast because it allows you to come back, regroup, strategize about how to pivot and do it differently moving forward. Minimum viable product means good enough to put out into the world. So I believe it was Voltaire who said, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." And that is exactly what this particular exercise is embodying. Do not wait until something is perfect. Just get it done. So one of my favorite quotes ever is, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. I just think that that is such valuable information for multi-passionates to hear. I think it's so valuable for multi-passionate people because we often feel like we don't have enough expertise, therefore it's not perfect. But if we want to contribute and help, we have to be putting things out there. So consider that good enough still serves an audience. Good enough means that you can start collecting feedback in real time, which is invaluable information. Good enough means that you've started and you can make improvements more quickly. You can help more people sooner and improve the product more quickly. And any mistakes or failures just teach you what direction to go in next. So this brings me to the importance of normalizing failure. If you're a perfectionist, the notion of failing is like the scariest, worst thing you could ever possibly imagine. So I heard this presentation done by this amazing woman named Kristen Hadid, and she was talking about how she has her entire staff make failure resumes. So my coach has us doing this about bad financial investments. So like, for example, let's say I blew $10,000 on a coach who I quickly realized I wasn't aligned with, or I knew more than that person did or whatever. My current coach, who I'm very aligned with, had us reframe that from the perspective of I am now $10,000 more valuable to my clients because I can help someone else not make the same mistake. And if that knowledge helps 10 other people find the right coach instead of spending money on the wrong one, that failure on my part just did $100,000 worth of good. So I think this is a beautiful way to flip the script on failures. And what Kristen Hadid has people doing is writing down everything that they consider on their life's resume of failures and then writing the lesson that they learned from it. Because that's what failures are for, you guys, is to teach us, hey, how to course correct so that we don't do the same thing again. And this is what wisdom is. As you get older, you become more wise because you've fucked up and learned how to fix it so that you wouldn't make the same mistakes moving forward. So a failure resume where you are able to look at all of the things that you consider like flaws, blips on the perfect spectrum of your life, and see the value in those, see how they actually increase your value to the people that you're trying to help, because these are the lessons that you can teach them so they don't have to go through them. So in this vein, I invite you to participate in a failure challenge. So Jiang is the author of a book called Rejection Proof, and it essentially covers the topic of exposure therapy. So exposure therapy is if you were, and I've talked about this in other episodes too, if you were, for example, afraid of spiders, exposure therapy might involve you sitting in a room and watching a bunch of different films with spiders crawling all over the place. And like over time, the constant exposure reduces the amount of heart palpitations that causes and the profuse sweating because you just become kind of desensitized to it. And that's how exposure therapy works. Like it desensitizes you to all the things that cause a stress response in you. So Jiang chose to do that. He feared hearing the word no such that it was crippling for him. So he did, I think it was like 110 experiments or something with the goal of hearing no. He was like, I want to hear no. Once I've heard it 110 times, I will no longer fear hearing the word no. So he set about doing these experiments with the goal to fail, with the goal to come away not having accomplished the thing that he set out to accomplish. And I love this because I like gamifying anything hard. If you can make it fun, or even like, it's like tricking your mind. Like, this is a game. This will be fun. This isn't something that like feels so icky inside of my body. So if you set a failure challenge for yourself, let's say you have a fear around being visible online. If you create a failure challenge where you take some selfies and you put them on Instagram, or you tell a super vulnerable story that makes you feel so utterly freaked out to share with strangers. But, you're told this is how to develop know, like, and trust. This is what you should be doing. Do it and go ahead and envision what the worst case scenario is. What has kept you in the shadows up to this point? What are you afraid of? Okay. That's the goal. No one will like it. I will get 0 post likes. That's my fear. Or someone will be like, God, I thought you had your shit together more than this. Like, that's your fear. With a failure challenge, that's what you're going for. You're aiming for that worst case scenario. So here's what's cool about this. It's like a social experiment. Now, of course, like the caveat here is like, choose something that like isn't going to cause you to lose your job or something. I mean, again, like being visible on social media is a good example because like nobody will die, even if the worst case scenario does come true. But what's great about this is if you fail, you've won. Because that's the game, to fail. But if you succeed, you've won. And what I love about this, by making it a challenge to do something small and scary every single day for 30 days, as an example, you will start to realize, the worst case scenario almost never comes true. Almost never. So the sky is going to fall. Not going to happen. Also, when things don't go well, like you're not like super shocked by getting 1 million likes, your post doesn't go viral, you will at least see that scary thing that you were anticipating is not nearly as bad as your worst case scenario, as the sky actually falling. But that third alternative is that you don't fail. And I have been pushed recently to put these very vulnerable posts on my socials by my coach. And I just keep thinking like, this is crazy. Like, why are you making me say this? And those are the posts that end up getting the most likes. So it's so very true. I mean, first of all, my coach knows absolutely what she's talking about. But isn't that interesting to see that this thing that you have created such a backstory around, that it is so utterly terrifying, to discover that that's not how things are actually going to turn out. And your fear is such a small, like what happens is such a tiny version of what you anticipated could happen. Failure challenges are the shit, you guys. And every failure, if you do in fact fail, teaches you how to be better, right? And takes away the sting of failure in the future because you've exposed yourself to it every day for 30 days. So it's just, failing isn't so scary anymore. I mean, look at the tech industries. Fail fast. They don't say don't fail. They say fail fast. Get out there and fail so you can go back and pivot and reiterate and come back stronger. So if this just isn't clicking for you, just remember the immortal words of Barbara Sher, who is the woman whose writings inspired this podcast. She says, if you are too afraid to start something because you're worried about failing, so you just never get started, Barbara says, if you're too afraid to start on something because you're worried about failing, she reminds us that if you don't get started, you've already failed. Because not doing the thing is really the only true failure. Hiding, wondering what would have happened, regrets. That's the only true failure. She actually goes on to suggest that if we flaunt our failures publicly and are full of enthusiasm as we share this thing that we tried and failed. And her book came out before social media was a thing. So she's like, flaunt your failure at the dinner table. It doesn't have to be in front of millions of people watching. But if you do that, the act of doing that also lessens the sting of failure. She says, your critics might call you crazy, but this removes all of their ammunition. You're like, I did this thing and it turned out horribly. And you laugh about it. No one can hold that over you anymore. You have lessened its power. Failure doesn't affect you anymore. So I can hear some of you saying in my imagination, Jennie, I still want to produce quality work. What about that? I hear you. I'm not saying forego perfection in favor of garbage work. Of course, I'm not saying that. So do this instead. Strive for excellence, not perfection, excellence. Excellence is attainable. Excellence is trying with all of your heart. It's making promises and keeping them, doing exactly what you said you would as often as you are physically capable of doing it. It's knowing your limitations and planning accordingly. Outsource the stuff that you suck at so somebody else whose zone of genius that is can do it for you. Excellence is honing your skills, getting better, getting 1% better every day. It's showing up to the meeting prepared, notes in hand, ready to roll, always on time. Excellence is treating people with decency and appreciation. It's bringing the best you can to each moment while accepting that there will be a few typos and links that go to nothing and blunders and embarrassments along the way because we are human. Perfection is not attainable. Excellence is, perfection is not. Perfection is strict, robotic, error-free in a way that is not possible for living human beings made of flesh and bone. It's an unrealistic standard that is painful to strive for, and even more painful when it goes unreached, which of course is always. Perfection is clawing desperately for something that does not even exist on this earth. It's futile. So that's why I chose this quote to wrap the episode today. Don't aim for perfection, aim for better than yesterday. That's the goal, you guys. Better than yesterday. The only person you're competing against is yourself. Who were you yesterday? Who are you today? Are you 1% better? That's all anybody can ask of you. So if you are a perfectionist, I hope that this episode convinced you to rethink your approach to life from now on. I know that I've had to go through this for years and years and years. And so if I can help save anyone from that fate, that's why I'm here. So I hope that you got some good stuff out of this. Like I said, if you want the episode freebie, you can get that at jennieoconnor.com/perfect. And that's Jennie with an I-E, O'Connor with an O-R. I will drop the link into the show notes. And if you liked this episode and you're enjoying the show, I would be so grateful if you would leave me a review. Reviews help me get found, so more people who need to hear these messages will be able to see my podcast if you guys drop me a review. And if you think that the exercise I shared are tip-worthy, you can now leave me a tip. Whoever would have thought that after 15 years of bartending, I would be back in a situation where people can again show me gratitude with a tip? Who would have thunk it? I do think that this time around, what I'm doing for people is a lot more beneficial. So there's that. 3 cheers for progress. And I would love to hang out with you guys on the social platforms. I am at Your Creative Fairy Godmother at Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest. And I am on YouTube now. So come subscribe to my channel and you can watch video of these episodes and the interview episodes if you prefer that to listening to them in podcast format. And I just want to say thank you again. Thanks for supporting the show. Thank you for being here with me. I know that it's not perfect. I am doing my best. I hope you guys can appreciate that and apply it towards your own life. And I love you. And I look forward to speaking to you in the next episode. Talk to you soon, guys. Bye-bye.